Jack Andrews, the epitome of success and wealth, sat at the polished oak bar in the heart of downtown. His sharp suit gleamed under the soft glow of chandelier lights, his designer watch catching the occasional flicker of light as it rested on his wrist. The glass in his hand, filled with amber whiskey, shimmered like liquid gold as he swirled it slowly, lost in his own thoughts. He leaned back slightly, enjoying the hum of the bar around him, the soft clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversations, and the rhythmic beat of jazz playing from a distant corner. Around him sat his group of wealthy friends, a circle of successful entrepreneurs, all of whom shared one thing in common: the thirst for power. They were men who had built empires from the ground up, never taking no for an answer. But despite their shared success, they all recognized Jack as the leader, the one who thrived in any challenge that came his way. "I can't believe you're still betting on this, Jack," one of his friends, Adam, chuckled as he took a sip of his drink. "You're the richest guy in this city, and yet you still want to outdo us with stupid dares." "Stupid?" Jack raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. "It's not about the money. It's about the thrill. It's about showing that I can do anything." The group laughed, their voices full of bravado, but Jack wasn't concerned with what they thought. His mind was already elsewhere, scanning the room for something, or rather, someone, that would set his next challenge in motion. And then he saw her. By the entrance of the bar, in the shadow of the grand chandelier, stood a figure that caught Jack's eye. She wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, not with long, flowing hair or perfectly manicured features, but there was something undeniably captivating about her. Her clothes were tattered, a faded yellow scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her hands, calloused and rough from a life on the streets, clasped a cardboard cup, the kind often seen at street corners for begging. Her face was weathered, a mix of tiredness and strength. And her eyes were a deep, haunting shade of brown that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. The other patrons of the bar hardly took notice of her. She was invisible, just another beggar, blending into the background. But to Jack, she was a challenge. She stood there unmoving, as if the world was indifferent to her existence. That was exactly the kind of person Jack found interesting. "I'm telling you, Jack," another friend, Peter, laughed loudly, drawing Jack's attention back to the table. "No woman will ever love you like you love yourself. But you don't. And care, do you?" Jack didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the beggar. There was something in the stillness of her presence that intrigued him. "You think she's out of your league, don't you, Jack?" Adam's voice cut through his thoughts, laced with mockery. "I mean, come on, look at her. I bet you wouldn't last a day with her." There it was, a challenge wrapped in laughter. It was the spark Jack needed. His gaze never left the woman. As he stood up slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. He could sense the way the atmosphere in the bar shifted, the murmurs dying down as his friends caught on to what was happening. Jack was about to make a move that none of them would expect. "I'll marry her," he said, his voice smooth and confident, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'll marry her, and I'll make her fall in love with me." Room fell silent. His friends stared at him, mouths slightly agape. They knew Jack was good at many things, but this, marrying a beggar for a bet, they couldn't quite grasp it. But Jack didn't care. He had made his decision. He would prove that he could turn anything into his favor. "Are you serious, Jack?" Peter asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jack's smirk deepened. "Dead serious. I'll marry her tomorrow." The rest of the evening was a blur of bets being placed, laughter echoing around the bar, and Jack making his way through the crowd toward the woman. His heart beat faster now, not with excitement, but with anticipation. This wasn't just a game anymore. There was something about her that kept pulling him in, like a magnet. As he approached, she looked up at him, her gaze unflinching. She didn't seem surprised or moved by his presence. Most people would have looked away, embarrassed, perhaps even a little afraid. But not her. She stood her ground, her eyes locked with his, assessing him, sizing him up. And Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He extended his hand to her, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. "I have a proposition for you. How would you like to marry me?" Her eyes never left his, and for a long moment she said nothing. Jack felt a strange knot tighten in his stomach. He was used to getting what he wanted, but this was different. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him question whether he had underestimated her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "What's the catch, mister?" Jack's mind raced, but he kept his composure. "A bet," he replied simply. "I'll marry you, and you'll be part of my world. You'll get everything you've ever wanted." She raised an eyebrow as if weighing his words. "And what's in it for you?" "The thrill," he said, a glimmer of something dark in his eyes. "Proving that I can do anything, including making you fall in love with me." The woman stood there, motionless, her expression unreadable. Jack thought for a moment that she would refuse, but then, without warning, she smiled, not in a way that was kind or comforting, but in a way that was sharp, almost knowing. "All right," she said, her voice suddenly cold and clear. "I'll marry you. But you should know one thing, mister." Jack leaned in, intrigued. "What's that?" "You'll never understand me," she said softly. "And by the time you do, it will be too late." The rest of the night passed in a haze. The wedding was arranged, the vows exchanged quickly, with no fanfare. Jack could hardly contain his satisfaction. He had won. He had done the impossible. But as he stood there, staring at Sarah, the woman he had just married, a strange feeling lingered in his chest. It wasn't victory, but something more. Unsettling. She was too calm, too composed. There was something hidden beneath the surface of her eyes that Jack couldn't quite grasp. He had expected a meek, grateful beggar, someone who would submit to him and his game. Instead, he had married a woman who seemed to be playing her own game, a game that Jack couldn't yet understand. The wedding night arrived, and Jack, confident in his victory, led Sarah to their room. The bed was neatly made, the dim light casting soft shadows on the walls. As he closed the door behind them, Sarah remained silent, her back turned to him. She stood motionless, her posture rigid, as though she had just stepped into another world. Jack's patience was wearing thin. "Are you going to speak, or just stand there?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and curiosity. She turned, slowly, her face now illuminated by the soft light from the bedside lamp. For the first time, Jack truly saw her. She wasn't the ragged, unkempt beggar he had married hours ago. No, this was someone else. Her features were sharper, more defined, her eyes no longer tired but keen, calculating. He blinked, his mind racing. "Who are you?" Her lips parted, but before she could speak, she simply smiled. A smile that held no warmth, no joy. It was a smile full of secrets. "You won't understand," she said, her voice softer now. "You'll never understand." Jack's heart began to race. The air in the room seemed to thicken. What had he gotten himself into? And what was it about her that was so unsettling? The night stretched on, full of strange tension. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah wasn't who she appeared to be. But as the hours passed and he drifted into sleep, he didn't know yet how deep the mystery would go, or what he would uncover by the morning. Jack awoke the next morning, his head pounding as the sunlight streamed through the curtains. He groaned, rolling over to find the bed beside him empty. For a moment he wondered if the events of the previous night had been some sort of dream, a wild, fevered hallucination brought on by too much whiskey and too little sleep. But the cold, hard reality of the empty bed, the faint echo of footsteps from the hallway, brought him back to his senses. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The house was eerily silent. except for the distant sounds of muffled voices. His mind was foggy, and as he glanced around the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had married Sarah, the beggar from the bar, in a bet, but he still couldn't understand why she hadn't acted like he expected. Why hadn't she been grateful, even a little overwhelmed by the extravagance of her new life? "Where is she?" Jack muttered, standing up and stretching. His gaze wandered to the window. It was a beautiful day outside, the kind of day that was supposed to signify new beginnings. But something gnawed at the back of his mind. He felt like he had missed something important the night before, something that would change everything. As he made his way downstairs, he saw Sarah standing in the kitchen, her back to him, as she quietly prepared breakfast. The sound of sizzling eggs and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. She had been awake for some time, it seemed. "Good morning," Jack said, his voice tentative, trying to sound casual. He wasn't sure what to expect from her, a smile, a cold greeting, or perhaps something else entirely. But as usual, Sarah was calm, composed, and utterly unreadable. She turned to face him, her expression blank, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes that Jack couldn't place. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence, but didn't speak. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone as neutral as ever. Jack's brows furrowed. It wasn't the kind of answer he was expecting. He had hoped for something more. Perhaps some sign of emotional turmoil, something that showed she understood the strange, twisted game they were both playing. But Sarah remained distant, cold. "Sure," Jack said, taking a seat at the kitchen counter. He watched as she moved about the room, her movements precise and fluid. There was no hesitance, no awkwardness, as one might expect from someone who had just been thrown into the extravagant life of a millionaire. In fact, it was as though Sarah had been living in this world for much longer than Jack had realized. "I'm sorry," Jack said after a long pause, trying to break the silence. "About last night, I mean. It was a joke. I didn't think you would actually agree." Sarah's back remained turned as she placed a coffee cup in front of him. She didn't acknowledge his apology. "I didn't do it for you," she said softly, almost as if she was speaking to herself rather than Jack. "I did it for me." Jack blinked. "What does that mean?" She turned around then, her eyes meeting his with a piercing intensity. There was something there, something that sent a chill down his spine. "You think you know me," she said, her voice calm but heavy with something Jack couldn't understand. "But you don't." He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "Everything you think you know about me is a lie, Jack." The tension in the room hung thick as Jack processed her words. He had expected many things from this marriage, but never this. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his mind. He had assumed that he could control this situation, that he could win the bet and then move on with his life, leaving the beggar-turned-wife behind. But now, something was changing. Something was beginning to unravel. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Jack asked, his voice more strained than he intended. "Why play along with this ridiculous game?" Sarah didn't respond immediately. She picked up her coffee, taking a slow sip before setting it down again. She met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Because it was time," she said quietly. "Time for you to understand that things aren't always what they seem." Jack's mind raced. "What does that mean? What do you want from me?" She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of affection. It was a smile full of secrets, full of something dark and elusive. "You'll find out soon enough." The day passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was hiding something important. He had thought the bet would be easy, that he could outplay her, prove his superiority, and move on with his life. But now he wasn't so sure. The hours dragged on, and Jack found himself at a loss for what to do. His business meetings had been pushed back, and he had no interest in entertaining the usual distractions. His thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah, to the strange, unsettling calm she exuded. She wasn't reacting the way he expected. She wasn't being the meek, grateful woman he had envisioned. In fact, she wasn't reacting at all. He decided to confront her again, to get to the bottom of it once and for all. He found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, staring at the wall in front of her. She was lost in thought, as if she hadn't even noticed him entering the room. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice firm but not unkind, "what is it that you're hiding from me? Why won't you just tell me what's going on?" She turned to face him, her eyes cool and calculating. "You'll never understand, Jack," she said, her voice quiet, almost as if she were speaking in riddles. "The truth isn't something that can be explained. It's something you have to experience for yourself." "Experience," Jack repeated, confusion swirling in his chest. "What are you talking about?" Sarah stood up then, her gaze fixed on him. For the first time, Jack saw something flicker in her eyes, something that was not fear or anxiety, but something far more dangerous. "Don't try to control this, Jack," she said softly, yet with an edge to her voice. "You're in way over your head." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of Sarah, her cryptic words, and the strange way she had acted since they married. He tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that he was caught in something much bigger than himself. At around 3 a.m., he heard a noise, a soft sound, almost like a whisper. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. For a moment, he wondered if it was just his imagination, but then he heard it again. A faint rustling from the hallway outside their bedroom. Cautiously, Jack slipped out of bed and crept toward the door. He peeked through the crack, but saw nothing. The house was still. Everything was as it should be, yet the sense of unease remained. He stepped into the hallway and walked slowly down the stairs. The faint rustling had stopped, but the house felt different, colder, emptier. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, his foot hit something soft on the floor. He looked down. It was a small, weathered notebook. Jack bent down to pick it up, his fingers brushing against the frayed edges of the cover. He opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. Each one was filled with scribbled notes, quotes, and thoughts, but the deeper he went, the more unsettling it became. There were drawings, too. Dark, chaotic sketches that seemed to have no order or purpose. But the most disturbing part, some of the pages were filled with Jack's own name, his thoughts, his desires, his secrets. Everything he had kept hidden from the world was written on those pages, as if someone had been watching him, observing him from the shadows. As Jack turned the pages in disbelief, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He flipped through one last page, and there, scrawled in bold letters, were the words, "You're being watched." The next morning, Jack confronted Sarah once again. This time, he wasn't going to let her hide behind riddles and cryptic statements. He held up the notebook, his hands shaking with both anger and confusion. "What is this?" he demanded. "What is this book, and why does it have my name in it?" Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's not just a book, Jack. It's a warning." Jack's heart raced. What had he gotten himself into? The game he had started was no longer just about proving his superiority. It was about survival, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth that Sarah was about to reveal. The morning sun had risen higher, casting a golden glow over the sprawling mansion Jack had called home for years. But today, the house felt cold and empty. The walls, once a source of pride and comfort, now seemed to close in on him, their silence more deafening than the loudest noise. Jack stood by the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn, his thoughts in turmoil. He had never been the kind of man who allowed himself to be thrown off balance, Control was everything to Jack. He had built his empire by calculating risks, reading people, and keeping his emotions in check. But nothing about this marriage, this situation with Sarah made sense. His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle refusing to fit together. The notebook, her cryptic words, the unsettling calmness she exuded. It was all too much. Jack turned away from the window, his gaze falling on the open door to the library. Sarah had disappeared again, like she always did after their tense encounters. It was almost as if she was waiting for something, for him to make a move, or for the next twist in their strange, unpredictable game. He couldn't be sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed answers, and for the first time in his life, Jack Andrews wasn't sure where to find them. The library was quiet when Jack entered, the thick curtains drawn to block out the harsh light of the sun. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with old leather-bound volumes and stacks of papers. It was a space Jack used to frequent, back when he sought solace in knowledge. Now it felt suffocating, like a maze with no exit. He moved toward the desk, at the center of the room, his hand brushing the edge of the large oak surface. The notebook. He needed to understand what was written in it, to connect the dots between Sarah's strange behavior and his own disorienting experiences. Just as he reached for the book, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned sharply, half expecting to see Sarah standing there, her expression unreadable as always, but instead it was his assistant, Lily. She was standing in the doorway, looking uneasy. "Mr. Andrews," she began, her voice tentative. "There's something you need to see. It's about Sarah." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What about her?" he asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Lily stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I've been looking into her background," she said, glancing nervously at the desk where the notebook lay. "I thought you should know what I found." Jack's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What did you find?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she feared being overheard. "Sarah. She's not who she says she is. Her name isn't even Sarah." The words hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what Lily had just said. His eyes flicked to the notebook on the desk. Could this be what Sarah had meant when she said everything Jack thought he knew about her was a lie? "Then who is she?" Jack demanded, his voice low and urgent. "Tell me everything." Lily took a deep breath, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of the desk. "Her real name is Rebecca Carter," she began. "She was once a high-profile socialite, the daughter of a well-known business magnate. But then something happened. She disappeared. No one knows where she went or why she vanished. Her family hasn't heard from her in years." Jack's mind whirled. A socialite? The daughter of a magnate? How could Sarah, Rebecca, be the same woman he had married the night before? It didn't add up. "What are you saying, Lily?" Jack's voice was hoarse with disbelief. "You think she's some kind of imposter?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know what to think, Mr. Andrews, but I did find something strange. There's a report about a woman named Rebecca Carter who was found in the streets begging for money. No one knew how she got there or why. She seemed to be completely different from the woman who had disappeared all those years ago." Jack's mind raced. There were too many questions, too many possibilities. Could Sarah or Rebecca be connected to his own past in some way? Was she playing some elaborate game with him, or was there something more sinister at play? "Need to find out more," Jack muttered, his voice thick with determination. "I need to talk to her." Lily hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more thing, Mr. Andrews. I found this." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Jack. "It's a letter addressed to you, from Sarah." Jack's hand trembled slightly as he took the letter. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this. He tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the words that were written inside. The letter read, "Jack, By the time you read this, I will be gone. It's not that I don't want to be with you. It's that you can never understand me, no matter how hard you try. I know you think this is some game, some challenge you can win, but you're wrong. This is not about winning or losing. This is about fate, about something much larger than either of us. You are part of something now, something you can never escape. But don't worry, I will always be with you, Rebecca. Jack felt the words hit him like a freight train. Gone. She was gone. The letter felt final, like an ending, but also like the beginning of something much darker. His heart raced, his hands trembling as he reread the letter. I need to find her, he said, his voice urgent, filled with the kind of desperation he wasn't accustomed to. I need to know what this is all about. It didn't take long for Jack to make his way through the city. He had every resource at his disposal, every connection, every tool he could possibly need to find Sarah, or Rebecca, as her true name seemed to be. But the deeper he dug, the more elusive she became. It was as if she had vanished completely. There were no records, no trace, no sign of where she had gone. Hours passed, and Jack's frustration grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that something was just out of reach. Finally, he returned home, his mind heavy with unanswered questions. That night, as Jack sat alone in his study, trying to make sense of everything, he heard a faint knock on the door. He looked up, startled. It was late, far too late for anyone to be here. "Come in," he called, his voice strained. The door creaked open, and to Jack's surprise, it was Sarah, or rather Rebecca, standing in the doorway. Her face was calm, her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't name. She stepped inside without a word, closing the door behind her. "You left," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Why?" Rebecca's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was a smile full of sadness, full of things Jack couldn't understand. "I never wanted to be part of your game," she said softly, "but you never gave me a choice." Jack rose to his feet, his pulse quickening. "You can't just leave like this. We're married, you can't disappear." Rebecca's expression hardened. "You never truly knew me, Jack, and you never will." She turned to walk away, but Jack's voice stopped her. "What are you hiding?" he demanded, his voice cracking with frustration. "What is all of this about?" Rebecca paused, but didn't. "And turn around. You'll find out soon enough," she whispered. "When it's too late." As the door clicked shut behind her, Jack stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. What had just happened? Who was this woman? And what had he gotten himself into? He didn't know it yet, but the answers he was looking for were about to come crashing down on him. The mansion had never felt more oppressive than it did in that moment. Jack paced back and forth in his study, his mind in turmoil. The words Rebecca had spoken echoed in his ears. "You never truly knew me, Jack, and you never will." What did she mean by that? Who was she really? He was a man accustomed to control, to having every detail of his life mapped out. But Sarah, or Rebecca, as her real name seemed to be, had thrown everything into chaos. The mysterious letter she left behind, the cryptic messages, the complete disappearance. It was all part of something far bigger than Jack had ever anticipated. He had gone from thinking this was some twisted bet to realizing that he was caught in a game with no rules, one that he couldn't understand. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, and now nothing made sense. Jack sat heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples. The letter, the phone calls with Lily, the strange disappearance, it was all too much. His thoughts were spinning in a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. He had to get to the bottom of this. There was no turning back. It was late, and the house had fallen silent. Jack decided he could no longer wait. He needed answers, and if the authorities or his contacts couldn't provide them, then he would find them himself. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, determined to track Rebecca down. His car sped down the empty streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness. His mind kept returning to the mysterious woman he had married. Her cryptic words, ringing in his head. She had promised him that the truth would come when it was too late, but Jack refused to accept that. He wouldn't let her control the narrative. He wouldn't let her win. As he reached the outskirts of town, Jack stopped the car. He was close now, only a few miles from the abandoned warehouse that had shown up in the research Lily had done. It seemed like a dead end at first, but now, with every passing second, it felt more and more like the key to unraveling the mystery. The air was cold and still when Jack stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots echoing in. The silence. The warehouse loomed in front of him, an imposing structure with broken windows and a rusty exterior. It looked abandoned, a place forgotten by time, a fitting location for the secrets that had been hidden from him. As he made his way to the entrance, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. There was something wrong about this place. It didn't take a detective to sense that something had been here long before Jack arrived. He pushed open the rusted door, the hinges creaking loudly as they reluctantly gave way. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shadows and forgotten relics. Piles of old crates and boxes were scattered throughout, and the smell of dust and mildew hung thick in the air. Jack moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the darkness, looking for anything that would lead him to Rebecca. Then something caught his eye. It was a faint light in the far corner of the warehouse, barely visible but enough to draw him closer. He moved forward, every step deliberate, his breath shallow as he neared the source of the glow. The sight that awaited him was unlike anything he had expected. There, in the center of the room, sat an old wooden table, its surface covered with scattered papers, photographs, and maps. On the wall, a large corkboard was pinned with various documents, photos of people Jack didn't recognize, and a series of maps marked with cryptic symbols. But it wasn't the maps or the photos that caused Jack's heart to race. No, it was the figure standing by the table, her back to him, studying the documents with intense focus. Rebecca. Jack's voice was barely a whisper, but she heard him, her body tensing as she turned slowly to face him. For the first time in days, Jack saw something familiar in her eyes, something real. She wasn't the cold, distant woman he had married. She wasn't the beggar from the streets or the mysterious figure who had slipped away into the shadows. This was the woman behind the mask. This was the Rebecca Carter he had been searching for. She smiled faintly, though it was a smile filled with sadness. "I knew you'd find me, Jack," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I knew you'd come looking for answers." Jack stepped forward, his pulse quickening as he stared at her. "What is all of this?" he demanded, his voice laced with desperation. "Why are you doing this? What's your game?" Rebecca took a deep breath and stepped away from the table, moving toward Jack with a calmness that unsettled him. "It's not a game, Jack. This is real. This is my life. This is our life." Jack stared at her, his confusion growing by the second. "Our life? What are you talking about?" She paused, her gaze flickering with something dark. "You've been playing a role in this from the moment we met. From the moment I stepped into your life, you were already part of something much bigger than yourself. You didn't know it, but you've been walking the path with me, whether you liked it or not." Jack took a step back, his mind reeling. "What are you saying? That this marriage, this bet, it wasn't just about proving something to your friends?" Rebecca's smile faded and she shook her head. "No, Jack, it was never about that. It was about you." "Me?" Jack's voice was incredulous. "What the hell do you mean it's about me?" Rebecca looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You've been part of a much larger plan all along, Jack. You just didn't know it." As the hours passed, Jack and Rebecca talked, the truth gradually spilling from her lips like a torrent. She told him everything, the world she had come from, the secrets she had buried, and the hidden connections that tied her to Jack's past. She explained how she'd been forced to disappear, how her family had been involved in a dangerous game of power and influence, and how she had been watching Jack for years, studying him, learning his weaknesses and strengths. "You were never just a random man I chose for a bet," Rebecca said quietly. "I married you because you were always meant to be part of this." Jack's mind was reeling, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. But as the truth unfolded, one horrifying realization hit him. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, one that he hadn't even known existed. Everything he had believed about his life, about the people around him, had been a lie. "You manipulated me," Jack said, his voice thick with anger and betrayal. "You used me." Rebecca nodded slowly, her eyes filled with remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jack, but you were the key. Without you, none of this would have worked." Jack stepped back, his hands shaking. "You're telling me that all of this, the bet, the marriage, everything, it was just a part of some bigger plan? What is this plan, and why am I part of it?" Rebecca looked at him with a mixture of pity and understanding. "You're part of it because you're the only one who can stop it." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "Stop what?" "The game," she said quietly. "The game that's been going on for years. The game that's been controlling us all." Jack didn't know what to say. His mind was a storm of confusion and disbelief. But as he looked into Rebecca's eyes, he realized one thing. There was no turning back. He was in this now, and whatever the game was, he had no choice but to play it. The next few days were a blur. Jack found himself caught in a web of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. Rebecca or Sarah continued to provide him with pieces of the puzzle, but each revelation only led to more questions. He learned of the shadowy figures in her past, the people who had manipulated her life from the shadows, and the dangerous forces she had been running from. And then, just as Jack thought he was beginning to understand it all, Rebecca disappeared. Again, but this time it was different. Jack knew the game was far from over, and as he stood alone in the abandoned warehouse, the truth dawning on him, he realized that he had just begun to uncover the dark forces that had shaped his life, and that the battle was far from won. The days that followed Rebecca's disappearance were a blur of confusion and mounting frustration for Jack. His life, which had once been a carefully controlled empire, was now unraveling at the seams. His business dealings, once his sole focus, had taken a back seat to the chaotic web of lies and half-truths Rebecca had woven around him. The world he thought he knew had turned upside down, and Jack wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Not even himself. Every lead he had followed, every person he had reached out to for answers, had only brought him deeper into the unknown. Rebecca had been right about one thing. He had no idea what he was really involved in. The more he uncovered, the more the walls seemed to close in around him. He stood in front of his office window, staring out at the city below. The lights of the skyscrapers flickered in the distance, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. His empire, once the epitome of success, now felt like a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. His marriage to Rebecca, the bet and the mysterious plans she had hinted at were all starting to feel like a trap, and Jack could sense that time was running out. The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, his fingers trembling as he answered. "Mr. Andrews," Lily's voice came through, strained and anxious. "There's something you need to see. It's urgent." "Lily, I've had enough of these games," Jack snapped, his patience wearing thin. "What is it? Please just meet me. It's about Rebecca." The air in the underground parking garage was thick with tension as Jack made his way to Lily's car. He didn't know what to expect, but the urgency in her voice had piqued his curiosity. He had tried every possible avenue to find Rebecca, but each attempt had ended in frustration and dead ends. Now, Lily seemed to be the only person who could offer any answers. Lily was waiting by the car, her eyes darting around nervously as if she feared being followed. Jack approached her, his gaze hard as he demanded answers. "What's this about, Lily? What have you found?" His voice was sharp, his frustration palpable. She glanced around one last time before speaking, her voice low. "I've been looking into Rebecca's past, Jack. I found something big." Jack's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Lily handed him a thick folder, its contents bulging with documents, photographs, and notes. Jack opened it quickly, flipping through the papers with a sense of growing unease. The first thing that caught his eye was a series of photos. Not of Rebecca, but of a man. A man Jack didn't recognize. The man was standing beside a lavishly decorated building, smiling at the camera. The next photo showed him shaking hands with powerful political figures, their faces smiling, but Jack's instincts told him something was off. "Who is this?" Jack asked, his voice a little shakier than he intended. Lily hesitated. "His name is Alexander Ward. He's a billionaire, just like you. But his wealth didn't come from legitimate means. Ward runs a series of underground operations, shadow businesses, black market deals, you name it. And the thing is, Jack, Rebecca, or Sarah, whatever her real name is, was once part of his inner circle." Jack froze, his heart hammering in his chest. "What? How is that possible? Why didn't I know about this?" Lily's face darkened. "Because Rebecca was playing a dangerous game. She was a part of a syndicate that dealt with high-level corruption. She wasn't just running from her past, she was escaping something much worse." Jack's mind raced. The name Alexander Ward meant nothing to him, but the more he thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. Rebecca hadn't just been running away from her past. She had been trying to escape a life that Jack couldn't even imagine. And if she had been part of a dangerous syndicate, then he had unknowingly become entangled in a world of crime and deceit. He had married a woman with a past so dark it threatened everything he had built. Lily continued, her voice now trembling. "There's more, Jack. I found financial records, large transfers of money between Ward and various accounts linked to your name. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the transactions are real. Your companies, your assets, have been used in ways you never authorized. Rebecca's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, and she's been using you to launder money and fund illegal operations." Jack's stomach dropped. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the folder in his hands. No, this can't be true. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know." "I'm sorry, Jack," Lily whispered, "but it's all there. And I think Rebecca knew it was only a matter of time before you found out. She's been playing you from the start." Jack's world was falling apart. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. He had thought he was in control, that his wealth, his power, and his connections were enough to shield him from any danger. But Rebecca had outsmarted him at every turn, manipulating him, pulling him into a dark, dangerous world he had never intended to enter. He slammed the folder onto the car's dashboard, his hands clenched into fists. "Where is she now?" he demanded. "I don't know," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's gone. She's disappeared again, Jack, but I think I know where she's headed. There's a place, a safe house. I've tracked her to a location near the coast, but it's heavily guarded." Jack's breath caught in his throat. A safe house. What was she hiding? What was so important that she would risk everything to protect it? He didn't hesitate. "We're going there now. Get in the car. We're going to find her." The drive to the safe house was long and filled with an unbearable sense of dread. Jack could feel the weight of everything he had learned pressing down on him, suffocating him. His mind raced with questions, but every answer only seemed to lead to more questions. What was Rebecca hiding? What had she been involved in? And why had she dragged him into this web of deception? As they neared the coast, Jack's anxiety grew. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what awaited him. The safe house was located in a secluded area, far from prying eyes, surrounded by dense trees and rugged terrain. The place was practically invisible to the outside world, and Jack knew that if Rebecca was hiding there, it would be nearly impossible to get close without being noticed. Lily parked the car in a nearby clearing, and Jack got out, his mind focused on the task ahead. He had no idea what he would find when he got inside, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away from this. He had to confront Rebecca. He had to find out the truth. They moved cautiously through the woods, their footsteps soft on the damp earth. The safe house loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as they drew closer, the sound of their breathing the only thing that filled the silence. Suddenly the sound of voices reached Jack's ears. He motioned for Lily to stop, and they crouched low, peering. Through the trees at the guarded entrance to the safe house, two men were standing watch, their eyes scanning the perimeter, rifles slung over their shoulders. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew that the time for subtlety had passed. He needed to get in, confront Rebecca, and find out what the hell was going on. He turned to Lily. "Stay here. I'll handle this." Lily nodded, her face pale, but she didn't argue. Jack moved forward, his movements deliberate and quiet. He had been in situations like this before, using his wealth and power to avoid trouble. But this was different. This was personal. He slipped past the guards, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. Every step brought him closer to the truth, but it also brought him closer to danger. He couldn't help but feel that he was walking into something much larger than himself. As he reached the door of the safe house, Jack paused. The weight of everything he had learned was heavy on his shoulders, but there was no turning back now. He had to face Rebecca. He had to know the truth. He pushed the door open, stepping inside, and then everything changed. The door creaked open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest as Jack stepped inside the safe house. The dim, flickering light from a solitary bulb illuminated the small room in front of him. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and the faint trace of cigarette smoke. For a moment, Jack stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment that would either give him the answers he had so desperately sought or destroy everything he thought he knew about the woman he had married. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, Jack saw the figure standing at the far end of the room. It was her, Rebecca, or Sarah as he had come to know her. She was sitting in a chair, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the floor in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of calmness that Jack had come to associate with her over the past few weeks. But this time there was something different. There was no hint of the mystery she had always carried with her. No walls, no games, just the raw, unsettling truth waiting to be revealed. Jack stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Rebecca," he said, his heart racing in his chest. "I know everything. I know about Alexander Ward. I know about your past. I know what you've been hiding, and I know that I've been part of a game that I never signed up for. Now tell me the truth. What the hell is going on?" Rebecca's head snapped up at the sound of her name. Her eyes locked onto his, her gaze intense, filled with a mix of emotions Jack couldn't quite place. For a moment they just stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then without a word, she stood up, her movements slow but deliberate. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack," she said softly, her voice almost melancholy. "You were never supposed to find out." Jack took a step closer. "You don't get to decide that. You've been lying to me from the start. I deserve the truth." Rebecca's expression softened for a brief moment, a flicker of something resembling regret crossing her features. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "The truth is, Jack," she said, her voice steady, "you've been part of something much bigger than you ever realized. You're right. I wasn't completely honest with you, but I had my reasons." Jack's frustration boiled over. "What reasons? Why drag me into this mess? Why make me part of your twisted plans?" Rebecca's eyes darkened as she moved closer to him. "Because I never had a choice. And neither did you." She moved toward the back of the room, where a large desk was cluttered with papers, maps, and documents. She ran her fingers across the surface, picking up a few sheets and throwing them down on the desk in front of Jack. "Look at this," she said, her voice almost frantic now. "This isn't just about you and me. This is about something much larger, about power, control, the things people like us never talk about." Jack stared at the papers before him, his mind racing as he tried to process the flood of information Rebecca was laying before him. The documents were filled with names, dates, and locations, but it wasn't the details that sent a chill through him. It was the connections, the people listed on the pages, people he had never heard of, were all tied to major corporations, governments, and powerful families. "You're telling me this is about a conspiracy?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper as he processed the weight of her words. Rebecca nodded. "More than that. This is about control. People like Ward. People like me, we're part of something that's been going on for years. It's a system of manipulation, of pulling strings behind the scenes. And you, Jack, were the perfect pawn." Jack's mind reeled. He had always prided himself on being in control. He had built his empire from the ground up, using his intelligence and ambition to outsmart everyone around him. But now, standing in this room, facing Rebecca, he realized just how naive he had been. He had been played, manipulated into a game he didn't even know existed. "Ward," Jack muttered, his voice full of disgust. "He's part of this too?" Rebecca's face darkened. "He's the one pulling the strings. He's the one who has the power. And I've been his pawn for years. But when I saw you, Jack, when I saw what you had built, I realized something. You were different. You had the power to change everything. And that's why I had to bring you in. I thought that if I could control you, I could control the outcome of all of this." Jack's stomach churned as the weight of her words settled in. She hadn't just married him to win a bet. She had married him to manipulate him, to use him as a means to an end. He had been nothing more than a tool in her game. "You used me," he said, his voice hoarse with betrayal. "All of it, the bet, the marriage, everything, it was all part of your plan." Rebecca's eyes flashed with a mixture of guilt and determination. "Yes, Jack, I used you, but it wasn't personal. I never wanted to hurt you. I needed you to be part of this, so that I could change the system, so that we could change it together." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "I don't understand. What do you want from me now? You're telling me all of this, but what's the point? It's too late." Rebecca stepped closer to him, her gaze unwavering. "It's not too late, Jack. We still have time. Together we can take down Ward and everything he stands for. We can stop the people who have been controlling us for so long, but only if you're willing to fight, only if you're willing to stand with me." Jack looked at her, his mind spinning with the weight of everything she had told him. He had been dragged into a world of deception and betrayal, a world he had never asked for. And yet, as he looked into her eyes, he realized that despite everything, he couldn't walk away from her. The connection they shared was too strong, too deep. He had been used, yes, but he wasn't the same man he had been when they first met. He had changed. He had seen the darkness behind the curtain, and now he couldn't go back to the life he once knew. He had to make a choice. "I don't know if I can do this," Jack said, his voice quiet but resolute. "I don't know if I can fight a system this big, but I won't let you do it alone." Rebecca's eyes softened as she reached out and took his hand. "Then we'll fight together," she said, "but we have to move fast." Ward isn't going to sit back and let us take everything away from him. We need to be ready. The next few days were a blur of planning, strategizing, and making alliances with people Jack never thought he would trust. Rebecca led him through a labyrinth of hidden contacts and secret operations, each step taking them deeper into a world of danger and betrayal. Together they gathered evidence, built their case, and prepared to expose Alexander Ward for the criminal mastermind he was. But as they closed in on their target, the stakes grew higher. Jack could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the world on his shoulders. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about stopping a system that had been in place for generations, a system that had controlled everything he had ever known. As they prepared for the final confrontation with Ward, Jack found himself standing at the edge of a precipice. The choice he had made to stand with Rebecca had changed everything. There was no turning back now. The world he had built, the life he had known, would never be the same, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The night of the operation, everything came to a head. Jack and Rebecca, along with their allies, infiltrated Ward's headquarters. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. As they moved through the building, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something much bigger. The final showdown had arrived. They reached Ward's office, the door looming in front of them like the gates to hell. Jack could feel his heart racing in his chest, but there was no turning back. He pushed the door open. What awaited them was a confrontation unlike anything Jack had ever imagined. The truth had come crashing down, and there was no going back. The end